Hello and welcome to the Book Thing. My name is Mark, and today I'm talking about the 23rd book in my Discworld reread, Carpe Jugulum. So Carpe Jugulum is the 5th or 6th book in the Witches subseries, depending on whether or not you count Equal Rights as the first one or not. And it's also the last one. This is the last adventure of the Coven of 3 witches in Lancre. The story begins on the naming day of King Verence and Queen Margaret's daughter in Lancre, and as part of the ceremony, King Verence, being all modern, decides to invite various dignitaries from the neighbouring kingdoms, including the Count de Magpire from Uberwald. The Count and his family are a family of vampires, and the one thing that everyone knows about vampires is you shouldn't invite them round. So the vampire family arrive and decide that they actually want to stay and rule Lancre themselves. And obviously this does not go down well with the witches, but unfortunately Granny Weatherwax is absent. She took some offence when she believed that she hadn't been invited to the naming day ceremony. So without Granny Weatherwax, it's down to Nanny Og, Agnes and Margaret to combat the incursion of the vampires into Lancre. The big problem is the vampires are extraordinarily good at controlling people's minds. Ordinarily, the headology of Granny Weatherwax would seem to be the ideal defense against this, but actually the person who seems best able to defend themselves is Agnes, because of the additional personality of Perdita who lives inside of her head. The only other person they've got to help them is the Omnian missionary Mightily Oates, who has been brought along for the naming day, but is himself having his own crisis of faith. In case you hadn't realised by now, I am actually rereading the entire Discworld series and doing a new review video for each book every week. If you'd like to keep up to date with those, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. I remember the first time I read Carpe Jugulum not being a massive fan of it, but actually I enjoyed it an awful lot more this second time around. So the Coven is traditionally made up of the Maiden, the Mother and the Crone, but Granny Weatherwax is absent, and Margaret is now a mother, which means that with Agnes as the maiden, that makes Nanny Og the crone, which she's not exactly delighted about. And it's about their sort of evolving senses of self within that coven, and that's handled quite nicely. The family of vampires are really interesting. The Count the Magpire is very forward thinking as a vampire, because what he wants to do is he wants to break free of many of the old ways of vampires and many of the old weaknesses of vampires. So he conditions his children to not be afraid of religious iconography and holy water and daylight and things like that. My favourite character of the vampires, though, is the daughter Lacrimosa, who has the angst of someone who has been a teenager for 80 years and has a group of friends who, in order to rebel, do things like wear bright clothing and change their names to things like Pam and Gertrude instead of Lacrimosa, and stop wearing dark eyeliner and colour their hair blonde. It's a nice twist on the rebellious goth trope. Some of the elements with the vampire and some of the confrontations are actually quite scarily written for a Discworld book. I wasn't quite expecting it to be quite as gruesome and scary and jeopardy-filled as it is happened to be. This is also the first time that we get to see the kingdom of Uberwald, and which is explored much more in the next book, The Fifth Elephant. But but we do start to see things like the stark countryside and the strange servants called Igor. And that comes into play quite heavily in a lot of the Discworld books going forward. I had a lot of fun with Carpe Jugulum. It's a good 4-star read for me, and it's a pretty decent send-off for the witches. The witches themselves, they'll show up in some of the later books, but this is the last of the true witches sub-series, and do you know what? It's not a bad send-off at all. So I hope you enjoyed my review for Carpe Jugulum. The next book I will be reading will be the 24th book and the next watch book, which is The Fifth Elephant. So I hope you'll join me for that one. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching this. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that, and take care.